This is Political Communication, and I'm your professor, Dr. Patrick Stewart. Narratives have been around for a very, very long time. We humans love stories. Indeed, we may be considered the storytelling animal. From ancient Greece's Homeric epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, which deals conflict at the nexus of European and Asian civilizations, to our current obsession with reality television and their celebrities, stories are powerful tools for societal change. The narrative policy framework gives us the opportunity to look in greater detail and more systematically at how these narratives are used to influence public policy and how politicians use them. So the central question here concerns the power of narrative. And this approach uses both quantitative and qualitative approaches, so that understanding the power of narratives becomes important due to a variety of reasons. Two of them are highly important for us today. First of all, post-industrial society's consumerism and marketing has given rise to entrepreneurs of policy and image. They spend enormous amounts of energy turning their political and policy debates into battles over competing narratives. In a world of real-time policy communication that's driven by Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the 24-hour news cycle, narratives reach a much larger number of people with near instantaneous dissemination. So the ability to get your story out there first and loudest oftentimes means that you win. Stories are powerful. And this is important not just for politics, but also on the personal level. We need to tell our own story, or someone else will tell our story for us. The form of a narrative helps us define what is going on with the story being told. The narrative policy framework has 4 core elements that may be generalized across space and time. These 4 elements are the setting, and this refers to the features of the context in which the narrative takes place. Looking at consequential phenomena such as the legal and constitutional parameters, the geography, the economic conditions, as well as the values and norms, and what evidence there is available. This element oftentimes becomes a focal point of the policy narrative. Obviously, characters matter. Without a character, you don't have a story. The question is, what is the character? Typically, it's going to be a hero, a villain, or a victim. And each of them has these pitfalls as well as their strengths in moving a story forward, and it assumes different types of power. Now, there are also other character types that are used, and these include beneficiaries, allies, opponents, entrepreneurs, and charismatic experts. Ultimately, the characters help simplify the story because they build upon what we expect, and it doesn't lead to addressing the complexities of humanity as it stands. Now, the plot considers the relationships between the characters within the policy setting. The plot provides the arc of the action, and typically it has 3 acts. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So it allows for us to see the introduction of what the problem is. Secondly, we see the apex of the problem, what comes fully to light. And then finally, there is a conclusion. And this conclusion oftentimes is the moral. It's the purpose that is given to the characters' actions and motives. Without a moral to the story really doesn't teach us anything. Considering the narrative by these core elements helps us understand it to a much greater extent. Now, the content is considering what the narrative strategies are and how they're used. There are 3 of them: the scope of conflict, causal mechanisms, and the devil-angel shift. The scope of conflict is fascinating because some incredible work was done by E. Schachtschneider back in about the middle of this past century in his work, The Semi-Sovereign People. And it provided insights into how people play politics. Perhaps his most important insight, and it is worth reading this rather short book alone, is that losing strategies try to simplify to engage more people, while winning strategies try to constrain the conflict by making it more complex. This keeps people from engaging because they feel like they can't deal with the issue. So we might see on the one hand the use of symbolic politics, flag waving, appeals to emotion, and so on and so forth. for those who want to expand the scope of conflict. Those who want to constrain it will use more jargon, more scientific explanations, and this will keep people away from it. Now, causality is what people normally do. For instance, we can consider that the assigning of responsibility and blame through different theories is oftentimes the point of stories. The question is it intentional? Is it inadvertent? Is it accidental? Or is it mechanical? And these sorts of causal mechanisms can make someone a hero or a villain or a victim based upon how it is approached. Now, one of the things that for me is fascinating is that people oftentimes develop conspiracy theories. And this may be seen as a way of making sense of the randomness of complexity of life by attributing blame to an all-powerful entity, a villain. And this, of course, makes life very easy because that person obviously has control over everything bad. And this is also connected with the devil-angel shift. Now, the devil shift exaggerates malicious motives, behaviors, and the influence of the opposition. In other words, that other side is just plain evil. There is nothing redeeming about them whatsoever. The angel shift says that our side, our people, are the best people, and they have the ability to solve problems. They have this high level of beneficence, and they have an extremely well-developed skill set and the ability to overcome problems. But ultimately, this is just a simplification of reality. The core narrative assumptions of the narrative policy framework is that we have to socially construct our world. Social construction in this context refers to variable meaning that individuals and groups assigns to different objects and processes involved with politics. And this is because we have no real way of knowing everything about the world. We have only our reference point. So, in dealing with the complexity of other people's world and a rather expansive world around us, we have to socially construct all the things that are around us. A second assumption is that of bounded relativity. And this stems from this in the sense that we have attitudes towards different objects and processes that are bounded by belief systems, ideologies, norms, and starting axioms because the world is so complex. And this helps us address this complexity. Now, we have the generalizable structural elements, which we've talked about earlier, the setting, the plot, and the characters, and this helps us understand the world. But the other thing to consider is that when we look at narratives, narratives happen at different levels. The most interesting for me and what we're going to focus on is the individual or the micro level, which is how people deal with things. Now, the meso level deals with group identity and coalition identity, whereas the cultural, institutional, or the macro level considers the overall stories that we tell ourselves about our society. What is fascinating is the Homo neurans model of the individual. Narratives play a central role in how individuals process information, communicate with each other, and reason through their decisions. So ultimately, going back to what I stated earlier, being able to tell your story becomes highly important. That means that you understand how to become a great storyteller, which is understanding what are the core elements and the expectations.